With minimalism, it starts with the stuff. That's the initial bite at the apple because that's the easy stuff to see.
It's okay to be a mess as long as you manage the mess.
And so sometimes the art of letting go is about knowing what sorts of things we shouldn't demand of ourselves to let go, and then letting go of this story that says we're a bad person for not letting that go.
TK, I'm so glad you raised that because that's really one of the most constraining psychological issues that can contribute to severe mental health challenges.
Me and Ryan started the Minimalist 2010. We started the minimalists.com. It was just a blog. We started writing books, started doing speaking tours. And from there, different things happened. We have a couple of films on Netflix now. 80 million people saw that on Netflix, and it totally changed what we're doing. And now we do this podcast, which was a beautiful accident. And we like that all three of us think differently.
And I find in my life and in the life of a lot of the people that we work with that the number one benefit of minimalism isn't a cleaner house. It isn't a car empty of junk. It's about the person that you get to become in the process of making those kinds of decisions and unpacking the stories correlated with them.
That's very, very powerful. That once again so aligns with the research that I do, and in terms of cleaning up this podcast is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I mean, it's really in alignment with what we are talking about. Welcome into the studio, Joshua and TK. I'm really excited to talk about minimalism and what it means, and especially when it comes to mental health, because the work you do is fantastic. So welcome, and let's dive into this great conversation.
Oh, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for having us. You know, when we're talking about minimalism, it often starts with the stuff. But our material possessions are a physical manifestation of what's going on inside us. And the reason I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you is because, in our homes, we have a lot of excess things. We all know that. In fact, the average American household has 300,000 items in it, which would be great if it brought us more joy and contentment and happiness and peace and inner quiet. But quite often what's happening, that's a manifestation of what's going on here. If I've got a lot of excess clutter in my life, it probably means I have a lot of mental clutter, emotional clutter, spiritual clutter, psychological clutter, calendar clutter, relationship clutter. There's a lot of clutter that we need to tackle today.
Oh, I love it. That's a brilliant way of putting it, and it's going to be it's really great to unpack it. So, okay, well, let's begin. So let's start with a definition. What is minimalism?
I think the sort of the textbook definition, and we can unpack this together, minimalism is the thing that gets us past the things so we can make room for life's most important things, which it turns out aren't things at all, at least not material things. So quite often you hear about making more from less, but I think about it quite often as subtracting, asking a question: how might your life be better with less? Quite often we're trying to get more. If I just get one more accomplishment, then I'll be happy. If I just get one more car, I'll be happy. If I get the right things in my life, the right dress, the right handbag, the right belt, the right jeans, the right clothes, the right house, the right furniture, then I will be complete. But that's what consumerism is. Consumerism is the ideology that buying things, consuming things, is going to make me complete or happier. And there's nothing wrong with material possessions. I want to be clear about that. But quite often, if we have too much, the way that we get to enough isn't by adding even more things or more commitments. It's by subtracting, by letting go of that which is in the way.
I really like that.
Yeah, I do too. For me, minimalism in many ways is based on the underlying presupposition that no matter what it is, there's an unhealthy version of everything. And given that fact, minimalism is about establishing your relationship to things and the pursuit of things with intentionality. So saying yes to a possession and saying no to a possession both can be equally self-defeating and unhealthy in different contexts. So how do we focus our lifestyle around creating space for the kind of more that is life-giving, the kind of more that leads to true flourishing as we defined it, as weighed against the felt present of immediate experience?
Oh, that's really, really good. I really like that. That sounds, I do a lot of research in mind management and how to manage your mind. And it's totally, that's why what you're talking about so fits in with what we're doing, because managing your mind is really looking at, what should we add? What should we subtract? What should we be deconstructing and reconstructing? So this is just really great. Well, next question. What made you simplify your lives? How did you get to this point that this has become almost like a minimalist obsession, but in a good
Well,
sense.
me and my co-founder Ryan Nicodemus, who he's up in Montana right now. He's also one of the founders of the Minimalist podcast. We started the Minimalist back in 2010, but it really started way before that. He and I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. We grew up really poor, and there was a lot of turmoil in the household. There was alcohol, drug abuse, financial insecurity. And we thought the reason we were so unhappy growing up is because we didn't have enough stuff, enough money, enough resources. And I think that played a role in it. But I think it went way beyond that, because when I turned 18, I went out and I got an entry-level corporate job, and I began working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I started accumulating things, trying to fill that void with consumerism, with consumption, buying things with money I didn't have, things I didn't need, by the way. And in fact, when I did that, I didn't have the money, so I went into debt for many of those things. So as I climbed the corporate ladder, what happened? Many of the habits from my poor childhood carried into my 20s. I had a relatively successful career back in Dayton, Ohio. At the pinnacle, as I approached age 30, I was managing 150 retail stores, responsible for thousands of employees and really large budgets at this major corporation. And all of the things that I was pursuing to make me happy, they weren't doing their job. The stuff wasn't making me happier. The commitments wasn't making me happier. The status wasn't making me happier. Sure, some of those things brought me momentary bursts of pleasure, but I found that beneath the surface of the iceberg, there was all of this hidden clutter of my life: financial clutter, relationship clutter. Often we birth our relationships out of proximity or convenience. And I realized I had a really complex life. I didn't know it at the time, but when you break down the word complex into its Latin root, complex just means to interweave two or more things together. Well, I had interwoven so many things into my daily life, so many commitments. I was busy all the time, which, by the way, is the worst four-letter word in the English language is busy, right?
I agree with you.
Right?
That and stress. Everyone says, I'm busy, I'm stressed. I think we should ban those words.
Isn't it funny how those two things go together? We don't want stress, but we take on the status symbol of being busy. So anyway, I was living the sort of American dream, but it turns out it wasn't my dream. You know, I had the big house in the suburbs with more toilets than people. I had 2 living rooms and several luxury cars. And although I made really good money, I spent even better money, so I had tremendous amounts of debt. And of course, with that, I had that stress that you just talked about. I had overwhelm and discontent in my life, a lack of peace, a lack of tranquility, what the Greeks called eudaimonia, right? And so as I complexed my life more, added more complexity to my weave, I became more and more discontent until it got to this tipping point. 2 things happened to me. My mother died, my marriage ended, both in the same month when I was 30.
Wow.
Yeah, and when those 2 life events, like getting to 2 car crashes in 1 month, right?
No, that's a lot.
And then you learn something about yourself, like, oh, wow. You start asking questions. Why have I been so drawn to materialism? Why have I been so consumed by consumption? What is my definition of success, and how might I change that definition of success? Who's the person I want to become? How am I going to define my life by a different set of principles or standards? What are my values? And these questions prove to be so much more important than just trashing excess stuff. And I realized when I got to that point, I wanted to simplify my life. I didn't really know where to go, what to do. I stumbled across this concept of minimalism or intentional living or simple living. And I saw a disparate group of people from all walks of life. There were single travelers in their 20s and everything they owned fit in their backpack. And I thought that was admirable, but I kind of like having a couch. I kind of like having a bed, you know?
I have to admit, I do too.
I realized that there were different forms of minimalism. A friend of ours now, his name's Leo Babalta, and he was a minimalist, but he had 6 kids. He and his wife, a family of 8, a blended family. And I was like, wow, a minimalist can have 6 kids. A minimalist can be a world traveler. Another woman named Courtney Carver, she lived with her teenage daughter and her husband in Salt Lake City, and they lived a rather traditional life. Other people were living car-free. Other people lived in the suburbs with cars. All of these different flavors of minimalism. And I realized that I couldn't replicate any of one of their recipes, but I could tweeze out ingredients from each of their recipes and begin to simplify my life. And so for me, minimalism just started with that one question: how might your life be better with less? And I thought that was important because that gets to the why of simplifying. Everyone knows how to declutter their closet. You never hear us talk about the 67 different ways to declutter your kitchen, because Those tips can be helpful, but only helpful if you understand why you want to simplify your life. What's the benefit of letting go?
Yeah.
Love it.
You know, the challenging thing about identifying when you first got on the path of intentionality, of mindfulness, of simplicity, is that the further you go down the path, the more you can look back on your past and begin to realize that you've always been on the path. And it's just that those changes were little tiny seeds that you couldn't quite recognize as such. And so I think the path is something that we're all on, and we're moving at our own pace, and we're at different places in the path, but we're always on the path. It's just that sometimes the progress and the beauty that's emerging is not quite noticeable. I think for me, a time that was noticeable is, I would say, about 25 years ago. I would sometimes just like be walking to work or walking to class, and I would be carrying out toxic arguments in my imagination with people who weren't really there, having them say things that they never said to me, but they probably would say if the conditions were right, and carrying out these fights with different people. And I just remember having bitterness live inside of me as if it were its home. And I was so unhappy with so many things, the results I was getting, the results I was not getting, living with a spirit of blame and a spirit of resentment and a spirit of frustration. And there just came a point in my life where I realized, through a series of different events, where perhaps my efforts to shift the blame, those efforts were not quite received or validated. I realized, there's no refund on regret. If I wake up someday and I'm terribly happy, which is what I'm terribly unhappy, which is what I'm already feeling, there's no one who's going to be able to give me a refund on all the lost time, all the lost energy. And no one, no matter how much they love me, is even going to be able to astral project from their body into my body to carry out the consequences of my own heaviness for me. That I'm going to have to work this out for myself. And whatever support I receive, it's going to have to be built on a foundation of self-love, self-respect, and self-affirmation. I can't wait, because I just can't afford it. And if somebody can afford to do that, that's awesome for them, but I can't. And I got to a point where I had to negotiate with myself and make the decision to give up being right, because I was clinging to being right at the expense of being whole. Sometimes you can make the whole world wrong as an explanation for your unhappiness, as an explanation for your lack of peace. But I just came to a point where I says, I'm willing to give up being right for the sake of being whole. And from that point on, I've just been consciously on a path that life has us all on at all times, to be more mindful about how I judge others, how I judge myself, how I take care of myself, and how I find balance and peace.
I really love that. I love the simplicity and the minimalism in that, because it's so real to, and let me tell you, as a psychoneurobiologist, this is what this is pure and utter mind management that really heals the mind, it heals the brain, it heals the body. And I love your concept, which I'm sure everyone jumps on that statement that you made about there is no refund on regret. But that's the first time I've heard it said like that, and it's really, that is brilliant. And you followed that up with a comment of no one can teleport into your body and carry your whatever you're going through. And if you have to, it starts with that self-love, and things like shame and regret and self-hatred are so complex. They really are the opposite of minimalism. And they are such a tight weave that is woven into our networks of our brain. And it's so interesting, because when we do get all caught up in the things and get caught up in bitterness, that creates a very strong effect in the mind and the brain and the body, to the point where the immune system starts to fight that, as though it doesn't see that your immune system of your brain and body can't work without the mind, but it doesn't see the difference between whether it's a psychological clutter or whether it is a physical thing like a COVID virus. So when we recognize that, and it literally what thoughts look like in the brain when we don't deal with them, toxic issues, and we don't deal with the experiences of life that lead to regret and self-blame and all that sort of thing, it creates a immune response that is basically increasing the vulnerability of the body to disease, and that feeds back into mental health. So it's complicated. So it's hard work to go and get to this minimal approach, but the benefits of uncluttering, as a psychoneurobiologist, I can tell you, I can see it up front. That's why I was really interested to have this discussion with you. Well, this is really great. So that kind of leads directly into the next question of let's start itemizing or listing some of the benefits of simplifying. I know there's lots, but maybe you could just give us sort of a simple simplifying.
And that's why I think that question's so important. How might your life be better with less? We have people call into the Minimalist podcast all the time. It's a caller-driven show. And they will ask something, and you can tell what is behind the question. The question is rarely, and you know this, the question's rarely about the question, right? But if there's financial clutter in their life, there's a particular kind of overwhelm around that. And that can lead to other types of clutter. And so the benefits of simplifying are different for everyone. For some people, it's just, you know what? It'd be nice to have a tidier home and to have to do less cleaning and scrubbing. And okay, wonderful. That's one benefit. For other people, it's like, man, I've been working so hard for so many years, but I'm spending all of my money. I'd like to have a little bit of financial freedom. And one of the ways I can do that is not constantly spending on impulse. In fact, if I adjust my life and identify really what adds value to my life, you know what I can do? Maybe I can pare down my expenses so I'm no longer drawn to work 70 or 80 hours a week to acquire the car that simply takes me to work so that I can pay for the car that takes me to work.
I mean, it
becomes a vicious cycle.
Tautology, yeah, total.
Absolutely. And so the benefits are significant. For some people, it's, you know what, I want my relationships to improve. I want to be able to do something I'm really passionate about. Yeah, we just did an episode yesterday on the Minimalist podcast where we talked about minimizing visceral fat. It's a type of fat around the organs. We had a medical doctor in here talking about that. And we talked about some fairly simple ways to let go of weight. For me personally, I used to weigh about 80 pounds more than I weigh now. And so not only was I obese, but I was carrying around a sort of clutter in my life that was weighing down every other area of my life. And then you begin to realize, like, oh, this is all connected, right? My mind and my body isn't standing in a separate corner of the room. And I think the same is true with our internal clutter and our external clutter.
Oh, totally. You can't separate the one from the other. That's a really great way of explaining how you did that. I love it. Yes, TK.
So the way I think about it is there are some pursuits where the reward is nothing more than the thing that is pursued. If there's a donut on the table across the room and I choose to pursue that donut by walking across the room, grabbing it and eating it, well, the reward is the thing that I pursued and nothing more. But there are other processes where the reward is the way in which the pursuit transforms you along the way. So learning a martial art, for instance, the things you have to do in order to learn a martial art actually change who you are in a way that is so fundamental and to the core that by the time you become a black belt and you learn how to throw a punch, you learn how to block a kick, you also have become a different kind of person because of the breathing exercises, the meditation exercises, the mind-body connection, the self-awareness, the discipline, all the things you had to learn along the way. I see the primary benefit of minimalism is the person you get to become in the process of making tough decisions about what you're going to let go in your life, because every possession that we own is inextricably bound together with some kind of story. A story about who it makes me to possess this kind of thing. A story about what this thing empowers me to do. What it does to my value or what it takes away from my value. Who it connects me to. Who it disconnects me from. And anytime you let something go or even bring something in, you are reinforcing or you're revising some kind of story. And when you go through processes like decluttering or getting rid of things, you also let go of a different kind of baggage, namely a psychological baggage that often isn't even felt until you get rid of the stuff. There's so many things that weigh us down in these profound, immeasurable ways, and we never even know it's happening. It's like the music in a restaurant. You never notice it until they stop playing it, and then you say, something feels really different. And I find in my life and in the life of a lot of the people that we work with that the number one benefit of minimalism isn't a cleaner house. It isn't a car empty of junk. It isn't about the clutter coffins being gone. It's about the person that you get to become in the process of making those kinds of decisions and unpacking the stories correlated with them.
That's very, very powerful. Both of everything that you've both just said. Once again, so aligns with the research that I do, and in terms of cleaning up this podcast is called "Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess." I mean, it's really in alignment with what we are talking about. At this point, I feel that the listeners, because I want it, take us through a scenario. Give us an example of how you would, like you say, listeners call in all the time. So give us a scenario and how you have advised a person on a scenario.
Yeah, usually I have observations that are highly adjustable. Over at theminimalists.com, we have a free rule book that people can download. We call it 16 Rules for Living with Less, but they're not really rules. That's just a trope to get people in the door, because you start to understand they're just boundaries that we set up for ourselves. So once we identify the why you might want to simplify your life, it does help to have a few mechanical rules that set up some boundaries in your life. I'll give you a few examples here that I found other people have found to be really helpful. The first one we call the seasonality rule, also known as the 90-90 rule. You could take any object in your home. You could hold it up. It could be this coffee cup. Have I used this in the last 90 days? If so, I might want to keep it. I'm actually getting some value from it, right? If not, will I use it in the next 90 days? Be honest with yourself about it, because usually we can tell ourselves a story, but you know what? I'm not going to use this in the next 90 days. I haven't used it in the last 90 days. Okay, then I give myself permission to let go. Another rule is the just in case rule. Aren't those the three most dangerous words in the English language? We tell ourselves, I'm going to hold on to this. I don't need this. I don't think I need it. I'll hold on to it just in case. Just in case I need it someday in some non-existent hypothetical future. Well, another rule that worked for us was we call it the 2020 rule, or the just in case rule. So any item I'm holding on to just in case, I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to use it in the future, I can give myself permission to let it go, because I can replace it for less than $20 in less than 20 minutes from wherever I am. Now, at first, Dr. Leaf, that sounds like an incredible rule of privilege. I have to go around every day replacing $20, $20, $20. But here's the secret. You never end up using it. Over the last decade, I've had to use that rule 5 times, just 5 times in a decade. And I'll tell you this, it's given me permission to let go of tens of thousands of just-in-case items I was holding on to.
Wow.
Get those things out of the way, because it turns out they're junk. One last rule for you. We call it the no junk rule. Everything you own in your house, in your car, in your life, it fits in one of 3 piles. Anything you're thinking about acquiring can also go into one of these 3 piles. It's either essential, it's non-essential but value-adding, or it's junk. Essentials are all pretty much the same for everybody. We all need clothes, we all need shelter, we all need food, we all need transportation. Even those things look different for different people, we all have basic essentials. Above that, though, this is really where minimalism comes in. We have non-essentials, but there are things that add value to our lives. Strictly speaking, I could live without a couch. I could live without my coffee table. But I get value from those things. And I'm a minimalist. I'm not a deprivationalist. It's not about depriving yourself of things that you might need or that you might enjoy. I'm not a ascetic or a monk. There's nothing wrong with that, but I actually get immense value. In fact, that's the paradox of minimalism. As a minimalist, I get far more value from the few items I own than if I were to water them down with hundreds of thousands of excess trinkets. Unfortunately, most of the things we own, they fit into that third category, the junk. As I said earlier, the average American has 300,000 items in their home. Most of those things are junk. They masquerade as essential or as value-adding. We tell ourselves a story that I got value from it once before, so maybe I'll get value from it again. But if something ceases to add value, then I'm willing to let it go. I wish there was a list of the 100 things that you should own, and then you'll be a good minimalist, you'll be complete, everything will be great. But the truth is, if I own 100 things, those things might get in your way. They might be junk to you. They might be essential to me and vice versa.
I love that. So that people can download the 16 rules and find out more about that and apply that to their life. This is really good practical stuff. I love it.
If I can give something that comes in a lot as a problem is usually a loved one passes away and there's some kind of object that really connects them to that loved one. And for a while, holding on to that possession almost gives the sensation of being able to keep a part of them in their lives. But then where we get the call is that person feels a little overwhelmed. Maybe they're moving, Maybe the thing has served its purpose. Maybe just some things about their lifestyle has changed. And so here's this typewriter that's sitting on my desk. And it was the way that I held on to my grandfather for a few years. But now I don't want this thing anymore. I just don't want it. And they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one end, they can choose to just keep it out of guilt, which makes them feel heavy and adds to their clutter. Or they can just completely disregard their conscience and say, forget about it. I'm just going to get rid of it, but do something that really feels like they're going against their principles. And you want to try to reconcile those two. And something that we've been able to help a lot of people step back and think about is this beautiful quote that Joshua says in the documentary: our memories are not in our things, our memories are in ourselves. And how to make that real. So we did an entire episode called Funeral for Things, where we talked about this concept of how sometimes letting things go are difficult, because letting things go, it's a difficult thing because we haven't found a meaningful way to say goodbye. And so we help people think about, all right, what does this object or this possession represent for you? And let's write it down. Okay, the typewriter represents my grandfather's autonomy and self-determination and how he was able to create a career using his writing skills. It represents self-awareness and how he was able to achieve clarity of thought using this typewriter. It represents all these different things. Okay, now you've got that. And then you can ceremonialize the process of letting this go. And you can make a promise to your grandfather or whatever it may be that, or a promise to yourself that you're going to allow these qualities to continue to live in you and be expressed through your work and through your own creativity. And it doesn't have to be one particular way of ceremonializing it, but connecting with that power of ritual, which has served us anthropologically. Like we have a natural tendency as human cultures to ritualize things like getting married, things like someone dying, things like transitioning to manhood, or whatever it may be. And when you ritualize things, you make it meaningful in a way. You acknowledge it and affirm it and look at it in a way that makes it easier for you to hold on or to let go in the way that you need to. And so that's an example of how, in order for people to get to this point where they can let something go, they've got to really unpack their stories and learn how to tell themselves a different story.
That's beautiful. Part of the work I've done over the last 38 years is to understand what memory is and what thoughts are, and how memories build into physical thought trees in your brain through the process of neuroplasticity, which is driven by your mind. So point being is that when you said that, I love the example that you gave of the letting something go, if you've lost a loved one or something like that, because basically the exercise that you've walked them around is then taking that memory of that loved one and making it even stronger and more beautiful, and that's wired into your mind, brain, body network, so it's always with you. And I had a similar experience because we moved to this country. We're from South Africa and we have 4 children, and we moved to this country around 15 years ago when our children were still young. And as any mother does, when you have children, you take photos and you keep little books, and parents aren't necessarily just mothers, parents, and you build up all these things in that first letter and their first, all the things, clutter that you build up, and you want to keep it forever. And I'm really organized, and I had a big house with a lot of room, and so I had all this stuff, and I thought, gosh, now I've got to move. I cannot take, because if I take this, it's going to be a whole shipload of just, not that we came by ship, we flew by plane, but I'm going to have to actually have boxes. Where am I going to put all this stuff? So I had to make some serious decisions. And, I went through that without knowing you two, and but knowing the neuroscience. I went through the process of saying those same things to myself of, hey, listen, this is memories. I'm going to select enough that I can fit this into 2 hand luggages and the photos and whatever, and take the most important things. And that was really a challenge. And I kept some for a while in a box. I came back a few times because it took a while before we sold our house, and because we were going to hang on to the house, and we had to declutter that too, to let go of things. And slowly but surely, we whittled it down to 4 boxes of stuff that I have of the children that represents the, sort of my outstanding memories. And at first it was hard. I had to realize that the physical externalization is not the thing that is holding us in sort of honoring whatever the situation is, the persons, your children, your lost loved one, so on. It is the process of what it's done to you as a person and how it's transformed. And it really spoke into my work of, we've got to rely on ourselves. It speaks back to the point you made earlier on, TK, that our true peace, internal peace, comes from decluttering, which comes from us making peace inside ourselves and not relying on the external. So there's so many layers in the conversation that we are having currently. So I love it. I love where this is going. We could get so deep and so philosophical so quickly with this stuff. I love it.
You know, what's fascinating is quite often what will happen here. You're making me think of two things. One is it's possible to let go of something physically, but not let go of it mentally or emotionally. Simply donating something, or actually, here's a better example. If your house gets robbed and something that is precious to you gets stolen, yeah, you're forced to let it go physically, but mentally, you're all of a sudden a wreck because that thing is gone. Now, that obviously has to do with the stories that we tell ourselves, what I would call belief clutter, right? I am less of a person. I'm less whole now because, you know what? I don't have that thing anymore, and that thing was a piece of me. So there's identity clutter associated with that as well. But then the other thing you talked about, without boundaries, what happens is our stuff expands to fill whatever space that we're in. You can live in a 200 square foot home or a 20,000
It'll get
square foot
full.
home. Yes. And we feel compelled to fill every corner, right? Which is strange because when we go to the most calm, most peaceful spaces, whether it's a Zen garden or you go to a beautiful museum,
Yeah.
you really appreciate the openness, the airiness, the space. It's not that they have nothing, because what they do have is really the focal point there, and it creates a peaceful environment. You're not walking into an empty room. You're walking into an art gallery that is filled with the appropriate amount of artwork for that space. And it wouldn't be you wouldn't benefit more if you removed all the art from it. Then you'd be depriving yourself. And conversely, if you put 100 times the art in there, it would actually get in the way of your experience. And I think the same is true with the material possessions we bring into our homes.
That's beautiful. That's a really good analogy. I love it.
Just one other piece that minimalism can really help with letting go on the psychological side. I think about bad dating experiences, for instance, or particularly people who have dated or married someone that turned out to be a con artist, or that turned out to be living a double life or something along those lines. Like, who in the world did I marry? It's very common for people in those types of situations to say, I'm so stupid. I'm such a screw up. I should have known. I should have noticed this or that red flag. And as Josh often says, they should all over themselves. Now, you
So
can
good.
be an unhealthfully hyper optimist and come in and tell people, "Oh, just let it go." But you can't just let that
No,
go.
it's always
You can't
there. It's
just
always
let go.
there. Hmm.
Yeah, like this person may have hurt you. This person may have taken a lot of money or lied to you or hurt your reputation in some way. You can't let go of that. But here's what you can let go. You can let go of a story that says you are a total screw up, a good for nothing, stupid person for allowing this to happen to you. You can replace that with another story that says, I'm a human being that is living my life, trying my best, and like many other people in this world, I trusted someone and it didn't work out, and I can learn from this. I can feel bad about it. I can take the time to process the way I feel in whatever way I need to, but this doesn't mean I'm a screw up and that I don't deserve another shot at love, another shot at life. And in that space, you're still dealing with heartbreak, you're still dealing with pragmatic difficulties, but now you have a story that serves as a good foundation for being able to heal and being able to move towards practical solutions so that you can live the best life that's accessible to you. And so sometimes the art of letting go is about knowing what sorts of things we shouldn't demand of ourselves to let go, and then letting go of this story that says we're a bad person for not letting that go.
TK, I'm so glad you raised that, because that's really one of the most constraining psychological issues that can contribute to severe mental health challenges. And it's that shame of the mistakes I've made, and it leads to that also the regret concept you spoke about earlier on, not getting any refund for the regret. And to be able to let that go is, if I think of working with my patients and just the millions of people we reach now through our platform, that is one of the most common things that comes up. And I mean, I know in myself, I think I can speak to, I'm sure everyone who's listening and watching this, they can say that there's times where they have said, why did I do that? I can't tell you how many times I've raised my hands and said that to myself. Why didn't I see that? But instead of seeing it as a failure, we can see that as something to learn from. As you say, we can learn to let go of that. Otherwise, that concept wires into your brain as a toxic change in your brain that sets you up to feel even worse and becomes that clutter, that cluttered mess. And one of the things that I just, in summary of this particular discussion we're having, something I say all the time on this podcast and that I say in all my work is it's okay to be a mess as long as you manage the mess. So it's key that you manage the mess. It's okay to be a mess because that allows yourself to see this has happened, but you've got to manage that mess. And I think that we're talking the same language. I think it's the same kind of message that we are sharing.
Also, messy is perspectival, right? Because what might seem like a mess to me if I walk into a space, someone else might feel like this is totally organized.
Exactly.
Someone could be an extreme extrovert and I'm an extreme introvert. My idea of a messy life is appreciably different from their idea of a messy life.
Absolutely. It's so true. So that messiness is so unique to each individual. And this is where that uniqueness needs to be recognized. And, we talk about those things, but we live in a society of comparison, especially with curated social media of, okay, well, it's saying to them, your messiness is different to mine. But then they look at Instagram and say, oh, well, I've got to look like that. I've got to have everything look, that's what messiness doesn't look like. And so that's also a big, huge thing, is to find your comfort zone of, well, your unique way that you find messiness is disruptive, and then, work on that, which is so powerful. I love it. Why does the world in general need more minimalism? And this is like getting into some philosophical stuff here.
So I'm going to give an odd, paradoxical answer to this question. I'm not sure if it does. I'm not so sure if I would want to hitch minimalism to the wagon of need. I think some of the greatest discoveries, the greatest solutions to problems, the greatest expressions of human creativity come not from a place of being told that you need something or being told that you ought to do something, but it comes from a place of conviction and self-awareness. And so for me, I'm not here to sell the world on the idea that everyone needs minimalism. I'm here to invite everyone to be as intentional and mindful as they can about the things that matter most to them in a world that is constantly shoving desires and questions and concerns down your throat, trying to tell you this is what you ought to be feeling. This is the opinion that you ought to have. This is the way you should define what it means to be informed, or what it means to be virtuous, or what it means to be free. And we live in this world of mimetic desire where we are so influenced by all of the external noise that we don't even know who we are anymore. We don't even know what we want for ourselves anymore. We don't even know what tastes good or what looks interesting to us, because we're so busy keeping up with what we think we ought to keep up with in order to be normal. And so if minimalism has anything to offer anyone, it's bringing a sense of intentionality and autonomy to that. But I'm also a big fan of some of the best advice I ever received, which is never force yourself to grow up too fast. The answers and perspectives that minimalism offers are only valuable to those who are asking them, to those who are wrestling with those sorts of problems.
I also think there's a problem with enough. Like, we don't know we never even stop to ask ourselves, how much is enough? Enough stuff, enough money, enough square footage, enough friends, enough years worked in my career. What is enough for me? And by the way, that enough point is different for each person.
Exactly.
But also, yeah, right. And it also changed for us over time as well, right? So what was enough for me when I was 5 years old is appreciably different for me at age 42. And so identifying what is enough, I can figure that out today, but also recognize that what is enough today might be too much tomorrow. And if I'm not willing to hold, or if I'm not willing to let go, then I'm just holding on. If you hold on too long, old Buddhist maxim here, if you don't let go, you will be dragged.
I love that. That's great. I hear both of you. I hear what you're saying, that is, as a global community, we need to be more authentic and dig deep into ourselves. And in that way, we're going to find the right level of minimalism, if to use your word, the right level of how we can function at a level of peace, which will translate back up into how we run ourselves in the world and how we interact in the world. And I love that. I love this conversation. It's just amazing. You make a statement, or this is a question you actually sent through. And I like it. What's the hardest part about working together that nobody knows, and what's the most fun part? Because you work together as a team, and the reason I like that question is because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but our core. Our company is called Switch on Your Brain, and the core of our company is my family. My husband's our CEO. Our 4 kids that are now adults work with us, 3 full-time, 1 part-time, and that's the core of our company. We have others as well, and we work together. And we've had to work out a very effective minimalist way, just to use your word of working together. So I'd love to talk, just to hear about your experience and what that looks like.
The Minimalists are really a collective. It's me and Ryan started the Minimalists 12, 13 years ago at this point. 2010, we started the minimalists.com. It was just a blog. We started writing books, started doing speaking tours. And from there, different things happened. We have a couple of films on Netflix now. One of which we just put out on YouTube, 100% advertisement free over there. It's just called Minimalism. 80 million people saw that on Netflix, and it totally changed what we're doing. And now we do this podcast, which was a beautiful accident. We started the podcast to promote the film. The films ended up promoting the podcast, but it's much more than when Ryan and I first started. We brought TK on after he had been on the podcast 11 times. We just loved his ideas, his philosophy, his way of living. And we like that all 3 of us think differently, but then it goes beyond the trio that you see in front of the camera. There's a whole team. In fact, in the studio we have right now, we've got Mallory, we've got Sean, we've got Danny, we've got the rest of our team. There's about 20 people on the team overall, full and part-time. And what we're committed to, we've become vehicle agnostic. I'm no longer concerned with one particular medium. If I want to meet people where they are. So if a TikTok video really helps someone let go of something that is a burden to them, if something on Instagram all of a sudden makes someone realize, when I say like every boulder that you're carrying, you picked up and you can also decide to put it down. If they see that on Instagram and they stop me on the street and say, wow, that really helped me. Great. If you hear the podcast, you read a book, you read the blog, you get the email newsletter, whatever it is, I don't care. What we're doing here is we're finding creative, artful ways to authentically share this message of living intentionally, living a meaningful life with less.
Beautiful.
I'm going to answer what's the most fun part that nobody knows. And I don't think anybody knows this outside of us. So we have Josh, Mallory, Sean, and Danny here. And when I say goodbye to them today, I'm going to say, love you. And they're going to say it back. And I have never worked a job in my entire life where I can say I love you to my coworkers when I'm leaving with complete freedom, not the slightest shred of discomfort, not the slightest fear that anyone is going to feel awkward with that, and know with confidence that they're going to say that back to me with genuineness. I've never experienced that before, but that is a true reflection of the culture that they've created and that I've been blessed to step into. It's really awesome. That's something that you don't get to see on air, the way we greet each other when we walk into the studio and the way we leave each other. We see each other, we hear each other. And that's truly special. I feel like I'm working with family, and that's a cliche thing to say, but I think that's real here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I mean, I work directly with my family, so it's easy to say love you because we get on so well. But to get that in the work environment, because that's, as we know, in this current day and age, there's a lot of issues around the workplace and pressure and so on. So to have created that environment is wonderful. What a lovely, fun thing to share. I love that fact. Well, I have another question that I'm going to throw at you, maybe not really a blindside question, but I think you'll handle this really well. And that is that you've both, like all of us, every human goes through stuff. And how has, maybe if you're comfortable, as comfortable as you are sharing, could you each just maybe share a story in your own life about something that you've gone through? And I know, Josh, you already said about the divorce and your mom dying at the age of 30, and that was a huge thing, and how you used that sort of triggered this whole concept of minimalism. I'd love to hear from TK something, and then maybe if there's something else you'd like to share or share as a group or something like that. That really helped you with your mental health, how you dealt with, because that's our mind. What did you do with your mind? How did this minimalistic concept really help you get through a situation that was extremely challenging?
Wow, this really is tough because there are so many.
Well, that's
I'm
great. That's
I'm
a great answer. So now you got to pick the top one.
I'm gonna give two and talk fast.
Sounds great.
Two of my very close childhood friends, none were closer to me than these two, Eddie and Marquise. Both of them, I've lost them. They both have transitioned. Eddie
sorry.
died early in his 20s, and Marquise died just a little over a year ago.
Sorry about
And
that.
yeah, it really is true that you lose a piece of yourself when you lose people that play such a major role in your story. And something that I've been kind of thinking about a lot since the loss of them is this notion of what I call vocational libation, where you if you have a little wine or have a little whiskey, you pour out a little bit, and they call that libation as an act of honoring or remembering the people that have come before you. And so for me, I've been sort of developing this idea of pouring out a little piece of myself into my work in a way that's unique to them. And I think about them like, what are some of the ways that they showed up for me? What are some qualities that are unique to them that I would love to allow to live on through me? And how can I bring that to my work? And it's kind of like a secret that I carry within myself. I always think about those guys, and when I show up to do the work that I do, there's an element of me pouring out some aspect of myself on their behalf. Something that's more immediate and maybe a little more less esoteric sounding would be I just got out of the hospital last week, and it's my second time in 8 weeks for the same thing, which is a bowel obstruction, which
So
was
sorry.
incredibly painful. Involved having an NG tube up my nose, down my throat, pumping things out of my gut, and the IV on the other. And this has motivated me in ways that are not purely psychological to make some significant changes in my lifestyle and my eating in order to make sure I am taking good care of a body that has proven to be vulnerable in some surprising ways. I don't want to go through that again. And I certainly want to do whatever it is I can to preserve me from being in those moments where you feel like I'd do anything to get out of this moment. And so I have to make and have been making some hard decisions about simplifying my eating habits. And there are certain things that right now I am saying no to because I need to make more life-giving decisions. And just in full transparency, there is a certain measure of sadness that comes to the surface sometimes where I'm doing something that I associate with the pleasures of comfort foods that I am now saying no to, maybe watching a movie or hanging out with some friends. And I'm having to parent myself, and I can feel that little child that's begging daddy for the toy. I want that toy, daddy. It means everything. And daddy's like, we're not going to be able to do that, son. And I'm crying like, but dad, I need that toy. That toy is everything. And my dad's telling me that we're not going to be able to do that. And I'm experiencing both of those things within myself where like maybe I'm out with friends, maybe I'm doing something and I'm like, I need that. I got to have that. That's who I've always been. And there's this other side of me saying, I know, TK, I know. I'm sorry, but we got to make a different choice. And I promise you, this is going to be for the better. And there's that tension there. And so I'm going through that in real time of having to simplify my life for reasons that I truly believe in. But just because you know something's good for you, and just because you've made up your mind to exercise the discipline to move in the direction of what is good, doesn't mean you don't have moments where you feel genuinely sad about it. And sometimes you got to live through that sadness. You can soothe yourself in different ways. You can say different things to yourself, but sometimes you got to live through it and allow it to pass through you and accept that that's part of your process of maturation,
Love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think for me, there are a few things that come to mind, but one that really stands out, I think quite often what will happen is we trade one type of consumerism for another. So we let go of the material possessions, but then we get into spiritualist consumerism, and I'll shop around and I'll do all the correct austerities, and then you realize, well, I'm just consuming things mindlessly in a different way. One that is perceived to be more virtuous, perhaps. And then we have people consumerism or relationship consumerism or busyness consumerism. I would just call it calendar consumerism,
Yeah,
right?
you mentioned these
Where
earlier, so I'm glad you've raised them again because I wanted to ask you about those. So thank you. Go for it.
Yeah, and so for me, what I realized, one type of consumerism for me was the sort of the desire to be liked by everyone. And I think probably a lot of that stems from my childhood. I grew up in a home with an abusive father, and we actually had to get away from him, like literally run away when I was 3 years old.
That's
My first
awful.
memory is of him abusing my mother. But then my mother started abusing alcohol, and I remember I felt really unseen as a child, and I felt like if I just did the right things, then maybe she'll like me. And I found
Sorry about that.
early on with the minimalist stuff, it was a beautiful accident. We had this audience. I wanted to write fiction. When I left the corporate world, my whole goal was to work at a coffee shop right down the street and make enough money to just write fiction full time. The minimalists.com and the podcast, all that was a beautiful accident. But then I found that once people started liking that, it became there was a craving for more of that. How do I get more of it? And I was consuming the attention of other people, and I didn't ask myself why. Like, why do I want to be so liked by everyone? And then the question I ultimately had to ask myself is, how many people need to like you before you like yourself? When are you going to give yourself permission to like yourself, as opposed to consuming the veneration from everyone else around you?
So good. That's so good. That's really so good. I thank you both for sharing that. That's really, it's practical and makes it very tangible. Just very quickly before we wrap up this interview, talk to me just very quickly about the different types of consumerism that you've referred to. You've covered a couple, but spiritual consumerism, you've just described the people consumerism, but there's different ways to these people pleasing, whatever. So this is your expertise. Talk about the different types of consumerism.
Yeah, with minimalism, it starts with the stuff. That's the initial bite at the apple because that's the easy stuff to see. We've got too much stuff. We know we're burdened by it. It's literally weighing us down. Quite often we have boxes that we move from one house to another and it never got opened in that house, but now we're moving again with the same sealed box. I can't even remember what's in most of these stupid boxes. TK used a great phrase earlier. He called them clutter coffins.
Yes, I thought that was very funny. I wanted to come back to that. So thanks for picking up on that again.
Well, what I love about that is it paints the perfect picture. Our houses have become mausoleums of stuff. We're holding on to all of these dead things that are not bringing us joy or contentment. In fact, they're weighing us down. Well, what else weighs us down? What weighs us down mentally or emotionally or spiritually? I think quite often the financial clutter in our lives, usually that comes from getting into debt, buying a bunch of things we don't need to impress people we don't like with money we don't have. And so at one point I had 14 different credit cards. Well, why is that? 1 in 10 Americans has 10 or more active credit cards, and the average credit card debt in the average American household, for indebted households, is over $16,000, and the average debt is $97,775 for non-mortgage debt. And so that's cars and school and credit cards. And nothing inherently evil about those things, but they prevent us from being free. They tether us to a lifestyle that gets really hard to get out of. And what do? We go into more debt just to pacify ourselves, to not think about the debt we've already put ourselves in. We're punishing our future self for the momentary pleasure of now. And there's also health consumerism or health debt that we go into. I reward myself with that piece of cheesecake right now and it's delicious. And okay, that's not evil, but if I'm doing that constantly, if my primary calories, if I'm subsiding off of empty calories, I'm not getting the nutrition I need. And I think that happens with our relationships, it happens with our careers, where we're getting all of these empty calories, we're filling our time, but we're not being fulfilled in a meaningful way.
I love that. That's incredible. And the spiritual consumerism, how would you just define that? Or does TK, do you want to talk about that?
Well, what unites all of the different kinds of clutter, whether it's calendar clutter or social clutter, is at a fundamental level, there is something that we don't see that is shaping the pathological need to engage in all of these forms of self-defeating consumerism. Well, what is that? We can use the word spiritual for it, but you don't even have to subscribe to a metaphysical theory in order to acknowledge that there are forces and factors all around us which aren't necessarily invisible, but they are so normalized, so part of the background that we just don't take notice of them. So, one example of this, you take observational clutter. Like, if you really think about it, observation is a form of consumption. Whether you're out in nature and looking at a sunset, or you're busy scrolling and you're looking at people and videos of people in a demographic you don't identify with, getting beat up by a demographic you do identify with, or vice versa, or you're looking at videos of people doing silly things and playing pranks, or people that are looking prettier than you. We are internalizing all of these value systems through what we are observing, much of which is engineered in order to make us good buyers for advertisers. And we're internalizing so many priorities and so many beliefs and so many values that they shape us, and then they show up as various other forms of clutter, which when we finally see, we say, how in the world did I get here? Well, it's because it's a little bit of that billboard there, a little bit of the 15 minutes of scrolling you did there, some of the movies that you watched there, the things that you focused on here, or not even focused, the things that were just set before you, so to speak. And so I think of spiritual clutter as the underlying forces and factors built into society itself, but so accepted as normal that they become pragmatically invisible, and then they shape our psyche in such a way that we find ourselves pursuing things that we don't necessarily want or need. But it's not until we have them, or until we're so frustrated from not getting them, that we start to question the process.
Brilliant. I love that. It's brilliant. And the neuroscience behind that is just, I don't know if you're aware of this, that 95%, up to 95%, if not more, of what we expose to in any one day is being wired into our psychoneurobiological networks non-consciously. And only 5 to 10% we're focusing on. So there's all that stuff that actually is then wiring in, and whatever's wired in is driving us. And this is where this desire to the decisions like, why am I consuming this, or why is this happening? And whatever you think about the most is growing. So once it's wired in, it then prompts your conscious mind, and then you start concentrating on it and focusing and growing it bigger, or you have the sense of unease and things are not quite right, and we go in these directions because of being driven. The happy news is that we wired, our non-conscious mind is wired to search this and to actually send signals to us, to the conscious mind, from the non-conscious through the subconscious to the conscious mind, to pay attention to these things that are disruptive, that we've actually wired into our networks. And I think what you've come up with, this concept of minimalism, is helping people to, in a very practical way, to understand the signals that are coming up that are cluttering us. So the signals of clutter that are coming from what we've focused on and what we've wired in unconsciously, and how to find these and how to deal with them. So I want to thank you for your work and for what you're doing and what you're bringing to the world, and it's amazing. And let's do a lightning round of 1 minute each. What was the last thing that you'd like to say in 30 seconds to a minute to my viewers that'll really boost them into decluttering?
All right. Before you let go, become clear with yourself. What are you letting go for? Discipline is not intrinsically valuable. Discipline is a means to an end. You can bang your head against a wall no matter how much it hurts and call that discipline, but that's not healthy. Ultimately, it's about finding something that makes life meaningful for you, and contextualizing whatever it is you have in your life with that broader sense of meaning. That will let you know what you need to let go of, but it will also let you know what the best way of letting go looks like for you.
Beautiful.
Dr. Leaf, this has been a super clarifying and thoughtful conversation. I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for that. Sincerely.
Thank you.
I think if we were to sum up this entire conversation or the work that TK, Ryan, and the rest of the team at the Minimalists do, it's one simple phrase. It's love people and use things, because the opposite never works. And too often, we try to do the opposite. I'm going to consume people. I'm going to love my things. Oh, I love my pickup truck, or I love eating at Chipotle, but I also love my wife? Wait a minute. We're conflating two radically different things. But if we love people and use things, we realize that life can be so much more rewarding, satisfying, fulfilling, and meaningful.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Where can people find out more about you?
We keep it real simple. You can find our social media, our podcast, our films, our books, everything at theminimalists.com.
Perfect. I love it. We'll put that, no one's going to forget that, but we'll put that link in the show notes anyway. Thank you so much. I hope this is the first of many conversations. It's been wonderful.
Much love. Thanks again.
Likewise. We appreciate
you.
you, Doctor. Thank you.
Bye-bye.